much for being here. Thank you so much for making time and space. I know it's kind of complicated to schedule. We're kind of all over the world a little bit. I'll read off some of the countries of the participating artists, but I just wanted to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I am Darlene. I am the steward of the Selfie Institute for Selfie Studies. We are a research institute that is just basically really interested in the way that technology is impacting our bodies, digital presence, the way that we are expressing, sharing ourselves through all types of technology, right? Not only social media, but also the types of devices that we use to share and explore ourselves. And the intention with this institute is to build a network of artists, of researchers, public in general that is just interested in selfie scholarship, right? Or self-representational scholarship more in the 21st century. And again, more maybe like in the last 15 to 20 years, where we really start seeing this kind of expansive growth of spaces for people to share themselves online. So it's not just specifically of the selfie, but we are also interested in just any type of self-representation through technology. We chose the Selfie Institute because we believe in advocating for the selfie and really giving the selfie a conceptual place in many, many disciplines and fields of study. We are particularly interested in building out selfie studies as a philosophical knowledge field. But we are really just open to expanding and thinking about it in so many different ways. So this is our website. If you haven't checked it out, I'll just give you a brief little tour, so you can find about us, who we are, and again, really thinking about the selfie and these digital self-representations as social documents, where a lot of really important representations of a lot of societal issues of our time represent ourselves, our mission, our vision, kind of just like basic stuff, our values. We really believe that it is important for all of us to come together and talk about these things as a space of like speculative world making, dreaming, and things like that. Our exhibitions are open calls. We do see ourselves as like kind of an educational institute. So these are just some of our course offerings. Some of these we have given, some of these are just kind of in curriculum and haven't given yet. But these are just some of the ideas and visions that we have for the type of scholarship that we can do. For example, selfie theory, epistemologies of selfies, the history of the selfie, right? How does it come from all of these legacies of self-representation, art as praxis, philosophy, selfie economies, necropolitics of the selfie, selfie and embodiment, which is something that we're going to be talking a lot about today, selfie spirituality, algorithmic selves. And then we also have some workshops, right? So how do we connect to the body and our emotions through the selfie? How do we use the selfie for storytelling? A lot of different things, right? Selfie choreographies. Something that I'm also particularly interested into is building out the selfie as a site of quantum mechanics research. If we apply the ideas of quantum mechanics into selfies, is how do we basically collapse timelines, collapse light, observe light through the selfie, and how it can kind of be a way of like portal making, world making. So we're into a lot of things. We're always looking for people to partner. The idea is that this is a collective institution. So we're always looking for people to send us articles, to talk about their art, to give workshops. So please feel free to send us any proposals, ideas that you have. If you know of any other people that would be interested in this, also feel free. Again, this is a space that we started building because we felt that there was a need for a communal space to come together and talk about these things, right? If we want to move away from social media harboring all of selfies and self-representation, right, which can easily disappear from one day to the next, which can be censored, right? Where do we go to talk about these things? Where do we go to access different spaces, different representations of the selfie? And that's kind of like what the Selfie Institute is thought of. Hello to everyone joining. I'm just giving a quick little tour about what the Selfie Institute is, what we do, our interests. We are a research institution that is basically interested in gathering people that are interested in exploring and discussing self-representation online through various technologies, social networks, and things like that. We have some resources, so just some papers, articles that we have written. Again, if you have anything that you think would like to share or present on here about any type of self-representation online, please feel free. We're always building and amassing our library. So we really want to make sure that we're a space to kind of come together and share the scholarship around the selfie. So we have our blog. Again, please send us anything you would want published. These are just some things, right? Um, we have shared around different types of self-representation. I urge you to take a look if you haven't yet. So now we're going to go into why we're here today, which is exhibition for holographic selves. And this is under the Wrong Biennale, which is a biennale that happens uh, every so often. And it really focuses on sharing digital art in many different ways. This year's theme is AI, which is a very kind of broad theme that is really more about like a medium, a tool. I mean, I think we're still developing verbiage around what AI is and the role that it has in our lives. So we definitely wanted to jump in on this and think about how AI is being explored by artists and the types of impacts that this has on the body, right? And embodiment. Originally, when we had this open call, the idea was to have a space to showcase artists that are expanding, questioning, disintegrating, melting the body or embodiment or expanding on what that could be through AI. So I was not really sure what would come up and the types of artworks that people would send in. I had some idea based off of my own research on experimentation with AI, but we really did get a lot of very varied submissions, which I thought was very exciting because it just goes to show that this is such a field that so many people are expanding on and exploring in different ways. And it was just really exciting to see the people that felt called to submit their work. I think we got like a nice survey of the possibilities of AI. So this is kind of the introduction. Again, it's an exploration on unraveling artificial intelligence, right? It's really about exploring this idea of a mirror, right? But it's not a mirror anymore as it reflects, but it's a portal to other things, right? I think when we think of this idea of the mirror, it's kind of like we imagine that it's like this one-to-one reflection when it really never is, right? There's so many ways to explore the concept of the mirror and the reflection. And I think that we always have to remember that the mirror itself is a physical entity, but also like a spiritual and conceptual entity that has a lot of different layers. The physicality is made out of a lot of different materials, which in and of itself affect the reflection. I think it's also kind of like this alchemical process where the same materials kind of like take the form and the shape of whatever it's in front of it, but it doesn't accurate not I don't want to say accurately, but again, it's like not like a one-to-one real reflection of what it is, right? We can never really grasp that. And then conceptually, right? What does it mean to reflect? What does it mean to perceive? So those are kind of the things and then tension starting with this exhibition. So again, thank you all for sharing. And the idea with the way that this exhibition was organized, I wanted it to be kind of like again, a confrontation of the experience that we have when we go and we stare into the mirror, right? That there's so many different possibilities. And again, when I was looking through all of the submissions, it was a little bit overwhelming and challenging because they were so varied and so different from what I expected, which I think was a challenge that I welcomed. And I really wanted to work off of this idea of like the quantum. Again, we're really thinking about the selfie as and self-representation as a quantum quantum exploration as really how are there so many different possibilities like happening at once, and how can we access those different timelines and those different spaces. So I thought of everyone's work as kind of like a portal and an invitation and a collapsing of light and a collapsing of particles and timeline and code and intention and energy, right? I definitely do think that one, self-representation, and especially self-representation through AI and through technology, is a type of energy work, is a type of alchemy. So I kind of wanted to lean into that exploration, and that is why I decided to use this uh, space called Twine. If y'all are not familiar with Twine, it is basically a space to build non-linear learning, non-linear reading that you can kind of like add hyperlinks, and it can kind of like choose your own adventure style interaction. It came out of the like the digital literature space. It has been around for a while, but I think for this exhibition, I really wanted to lean into kind of like that playful exploration of what happens when you stand in front of a mirror. You can really lose yourself and go in so many different directions, right? If we think about like through the looking glass types of vibes. So I called it the Hall of Quantum Mirrors. So this is kind of like the space where everyone's work branches out from. And I categorize everyone's reflections, everyone's explorations in these five concepts. So thinking about all of the different ways that our works take us on different journeys when it comes to self-exploration. So we have here reflection, refraction, transmutes, remember, and prophesize. And I always like to work from the space of the question. I've been an educator for many years, and I think something that's always interesting in building spaces of knowledge sharing is stemming from the question, really, what does the question mean and where it can take us to? Um, so I wanted the space to be bilingual. We do have some artists that are from Mexico and Latin America. I don't see them yet, but just in the interest of the fact that this will be on YouTube, I will also give a quick little summary in Spanish for those of you that speak it or that don't. Um, but bienvenidos a todos. Soy Darlene del Instituto Selfie. Estamos aquí explorando y presentando la exhibición Holographic Selves. Selves holográficos, y aquí estamos en el punto de partida en el espacio cuántico de las reflexiones, de las refracciones, de las transmutaciones, de lo que puede ser esta exploración del yo. Esta exhibición es parte de The Wrong Biennale, es una exploración que parte mucho desde cómo nos está impactando esta representación del yo a través de las tecnologías, ¿no? Específicamente a través de la inteligencia artificial. Entonces, cómo la inteligencia artificial nos está poniendo en un espacio de cuestionamiento, de reflexión, de incluso confusión, de confrontamiento de lo que implica estas tecnologías en cómo estamos representando no solo el cuerpo o el yo, pero también cómo se está representando estas ideas de lo que es acuerpar a través de la tecnología, ¿no? Entonces decidí generar este espacio a través de una plataforma que se llama Twine, que es una exploración interactiva como de escoge tu propia aventura, que tiene ligas, ciertas palabras que mientras estás leyendo tú puedes seleccionar, puedes hacer ciertas como que divisiones del espacio. Entonces, esa es la idea con utilizar esta plataforma, y cuando entramos al espacio nos confrontamos con este espacio que es em, pues un pasillo de espejos cuánticos, ¿no? Si pensamos de la teoría cuántica, significa que la luz puede estar en muchos lugares, y lo que colapsa una realidad es nuestra percepción de esta luz, ¿no? Entonces me gustó mucho partir desde cada pieza como una relación y un espejo y un portal cuántico, de cómo cada imagen realmente nos está llevando a distintas realidades que pueden existir paralelamente, pero que justo nos está llevando a distintos momentos de cuestionamiento, ¿no? Entonces llegamos aquí en este espacio y aquí vamos a dar el recorrido, right? So we're here in the Hall of Quantum Errors. And the idea is for each person to kind of really be drawn to the question that they are interested in. I mean, there really isn't a way to start. I mean, we're just going to start here with the first one, reflect. But I definitely encourage you, if you haven't been to this exhibition yet, to kind of go in and be very playful with it. I mean, it is a lot of artists. We have about a little bit more than 20 different artists. So it's definitely can be a bit much to go through one sitting. We're going to try to do that today. But I definitely encourage all of you to interact with this exhibition in different times. And it's also very interesting to see the fact that it really doesn't have this linearity, the different ways that this exhibition can change and show itself to you in so many different ways, ¿no? Entonces, creo que la particularidad de que podemos tener una experiencia muy diferente cada vez que nos metemos a esta exhibición, justo porque podemos partir de muchas distintas preguntas. Entonces les invito a que si no han visto esta exhibición, se metan en su tiempo y realmente puedan interactuar con la multiplicidad de este espacio. I think something that I really wanted about this space was to show the multiplicities that we all have within this exploration. So this is kind of the intention with this. Just quickly, I just wanted to share that we have artists from Mexico, from Slovenia, from the US, from France, from Italy, from London, from Buenos Aires, from Hungary, from Austria, The Hague. So we have some variation. We have some variation, which is very interesting. So thank you all again for being here, and for spending time, and your energy and being in this space from Ireland as well. Um, so as we go into each section, just did like a brief write-up about the curation intention behind these different pieces. I'm not going to go through this, but it just kind of gives you this idea again and this contextual positioning about what this group of pieces are. And again, I didn't want to start off with knowing really even where each artist was going to be placed. As you can tell here, again, it's from this place of question and choice. And I kind of wanted it to be the surprise, right? Of like, oh, where's this artwork going to be? Where is this piece situated? And again, a lot of the pieces themselves could be situated in many of these, but I wanted to make sure that I collapsed it into kind of like the ones that curationally I thought it made the more sense, right? So here, when we're talking about the reflection, we have different kind of statements, right? And the idea is that we read these statements and we kind of pick which ones we want, right? So here we have a name becomes an image. The machine replies with 25 doubles, strangers, doppelgangers, each falsely described with the same identity, right? It's this idea of like, I'm looking at myself in the mirror time and time again, and somehow there's always someone new and different. So this is the one that we're going to start with. And then I like to work a lot with affirmations. So and statements. So here is confronting the others, right? So who are we going to confront? And the first one that's going to confront us is Garrett Lynch, IRL, who is here. Garrett, I'll invite you to speak in a bit. And I just want to say that for this piece, I was very excited because I think that it it is a very kind of like gentle example to start into this exhibition about the different ways that AI is really just, expanding and creating so many reflections about a self, right? And I think just the work of Garrett was so interesting to see this type of aesthetic representation of AI. I think that it's a piece that is very clearly AI. It's not trying to represent itself as something else. And I think that I always appreciate the texture and almost how this piece also serves as a social document of a certain time, of a certain type of AI, of a certain type of visual representation. So, For Garrett's piece, again, each of these squares is a piece in and of itself. So here I linked into the full um, website where you can see all of the amazing works that Garrett has. So I definitely encourage you to kind of like go through and check out all of them. Again, there's so many variations. So yeah, Garrett, if you would just be so kind to share about your work, whatever you feel called to.
Yeah, thanks. The series of portraits, it was generated with a slightly older GAN, and it's mainly, I mean, as you said, they are self portraits, but it's mainly about looking at the gap between language and image that exists in AI. So we see all the time how language pulls up sort of false representations in AI, and this is exactly about that. It's about inputting my name, which the AI doesn't fully understand. And this particular GAN, what it does as a fallback is if it doesn't know how to interpret the name of a person and visualize that person, it will then actually put the text into the image. So it kind of does a combination of the two things here. It renders an image, which it tries to be a portrait of me, but is not. It's a kind of a failed portrait. But then it sort of, belt and braces, adds the name on top of that to make sure that the communication is clear of who this actually is. But the act of doing that then creates a portrait from an artist's perspective of, yes, this is a visualization, this is a sort of an abstract portrait, but it becomes signed by the AI. It becomes signed with my name. So it's all about this idea of representing myself through latent spaces. They are false representations, so in fact they're doppelgangers. And what I noticed when I was generating these is that the word doppelganger, of course, has GAN right in the middle of it, which was a nice coincidence. So that ultimately became the name, that this was about manipulating GANs, producing doppelgangers, which are not really visual representations, but are kind of representations in latent space that could somehow function for me or perform for me, because I do a lot of performance with new technologies. So these could become sort of performative identities within latent space.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think definitely very performative. And I think there's so many things that I want to just like quickly touch on. I think AI is very performative. I think it's very esoteric. I think it is really showing us that language isn't as fixed as we thought. Again, we really don't even know, like, understand how language works, even just in like human to human communication. So I think that it's so interesting, again, to have this confrontation with this machine, this algorithm, and have it give you these things that maybe you didn't quite expect. It's very almost kind of like a, um, yeah, it's almost very magical in a sense, and not to like have it like AI be like, oh, it's so magical and amazing, because it's not. It's also very dark and has a lot of very necessary, important social political aspects to critique. But when it releases these types of outputs, I think it really goes to show you that the machine can only go so far and interpret in its ways. And
Mm.
it's, you said something that it's like, you know, um, you said something that it wasn't like necessarily a portrait, or that it wasn't necessarily like something that was truthful. And I think that when we come to talk about AI, it's always like, what is truth? We're living in the age of post-truth. What is real? Is this an actual portrait or not? But I think that it's so interesting because the same thing could be said about the camera, right? Or the selfies that we take that are filtered, or that are even just inserted through this technology, right? It's its own kind of like factual document. So I think that it's really about, we have to just like let AI be what it is, and then we have to be the ones that kind of like pick up the pieces and rearrange it, and try to make sense of it, right? Because I think it's something that we still don't understand. I mean, even just personally for me,
Yeah,
So,
that's correct. I mean, as you kind of astutely picked up on there, this is um, part of a way that imagery, that photography is sort of changing as a result of technology, and it's for me personally, it's part of a larger project that I'm doing, which is about post photography.
mm,
How has our conception of how we captured images, which were never true representations of reality
yes.
anyway. They're always, monocular visions of things that are around us that are
Mm,
controlled by certain systems like perspective and so forth. But now we move into a computational age,
mm.
those things become more malleable, they become more possible to manipulate. Um, so yeah, so it's how photography is changing effectively.
Mm. Yes, definitely. Well, we could talk about this for hours, but thank you so much for sharing. Definitely, if you ever want to share any of this research, this information that you are talking about, we're definitely very happy to share here in the Selfie Institute because that's exactly what we're interested in. So thank you so
Uh,
much. Mhm.
I will share a link actually, which is related, which might be of
Oh,
use to people.
perfect.
There's a. I'm just copying and pasting it one
Yeah, thank
moment.
you. Yeah, if anyone has like any links that you want to share, if anything, it's like as we're going through and anything is kind of relating to any other things that come up, please feel free to share in the chat.
There's a paper I published about 3 months ago, I think it was, which is in Hub, the Journal of Research in Art, Design and Society,
Ooh,
and it's precisely about language and AI, how
ooh,
language is
great.
something you can control, visuals, how it becomes a performative thing. So
Ooh,
that paper is actually online. It's freely accessible. It might
oh,
be of interest to people.
great. Yeah, thank you for sharing. We're definitely going to take a look. Thank you so much.
No problem.
All right, so here we're moving on to the next one. So this one is listen to the monologue. So this is a video. I don't know if I sh have the audio if it'll share. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. Maybe not. But this is kind of a monologue that's really just talking about, again, this relationship to the mirror. This is by, again, Dart. I don't think they're here to speak about their piece. But what I thought was very interesting was it's like kind of this interaction that we've all had with our mirrors that is about, kind of talking, the things that we say, the things that kind of like this like sounding board too that we use mirrors for. And I think this one is really good at just representing what um the mirror can represent in AI, right? And how this is a mirror, and the idea of this is a reflection and a mirror dialogue, but who is it really reflecting, right? It's not the artist. This is something that was generated through AI. So whose face is this? What is this movement? What is the voice? Where is this presence coming from, right? So also it's kind of reminds me of like it's like this reflection, right? Where we see this hand holding up a mirror, but is it also a portal? Is it kind of like this? Wormhole that is pulling us to a different reality where we're just connecting to this entity that is just having this monologue somewhere. So I thought that was like really fun and interesting. Here they have two pieces, and again, it's exploring this idea and like again, who are these faces that are being shown? What are the intentions, right? Is this, entity telling the truth? It's, questioning itself and it's questioning this exploration of the body, but it's just code. So really, again, what is the intentionality behind this? So here it says it's really working off of this idea of prosopopeia. I don't know if I'm saying that, but it's an imagined absent or dead person represented as speaking, right? So it's again this non-human thing that is personified. And really, what does it mean when we're kind of having these entities giving these monologues about what it means to exist, right? So it's kind of like having this machine speak back to us, which can be kind of annoying too. It's like, well, what do you know about reality? What do you know of existence, right? Again, we have this idea of like, oh, the AI is just a machine, and we have these ideas about what it can tell us. But I think if anything, it's just um, bringing more light as to how we're feeling about these technologies. So you can check out the mirror and the audio. It's very disturbing, I have to say, but very interesting. Um, so here we have another one, right? Step closer. So this one is an augmented version of my selfie. So here we have the artist Nicola. And we can view the work here. Again, I don't know if I'll be able to share the audio, but Nicola, as I'm playing the video, please feel free to talk about this piece.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, welcome.
Ciao. Uh, I'm
Hello.
a, I'm photographer for more than 10 years has been taking photos using only smartphone. So for this Biennale, for this exhibition, I have merged my artistic practice with a digital sculpture created by an AI, starting from an image I made myself. So myself, my tool, the act of taking a selfie, and my creation have all become a single new artwork. So this is why I made this artwork. My English is so poor, so um,
No, you're
sorry.
fine. Thank you.
Mm.
No, no, no. Also, if you want to say something, I think you're Italian, please feel
Yes.
free. Again, this is going to be on YouTube, so feel free to say whatever you want in Italian.
Ah, grazie mille perché è molto più facile. E niente, questa ehm, praticamente è una versione di me migliorata, diciamo, perché c'è un corpo statuario, ci sono muscoli, che però non esiste, perché è una versione che è stata è una scultura che è stata posta in quel preciso posto, in questo preciso luogo con un software di realtà aumentata e quindi io mi sono sovrapposto ad essa creando questa illusione di una fusione, quasi di una immedesimazione che è anche una metafora del farsi i selfie, cioè i selfie sono una versione cioè, quasi in teoria migliorata o comunque quasi ottimale di noi stessi che chiaramente non esiste, perché nel selfie è una versione di noi che esiste solo in quell'atto, in quel momento in cui scattiamo la foto. E quindi in quel momento, e quindi questo mio giocare con questa scultura è anche una riflessione sul farsi i selfie e sull'atto narcisistico di farsi i selfie e anche illudersi di essere qualcosa che non si è, anche essere felici quando non lo si è, anche sorridere quando non lo si vuole, quindi è tutta una versione creata da noi stessi per il nostro, eh, come dire, eh, mm, un'autogratificazione di noi stessi e un ricordo di qualcosa che non esiste, insomma. E quindi ho giocato su questa concettualizzazione del selfie e della mia pratica artistica, che è quella appunto della iPhoneografia, cioè la fotografia da iPhone, che io la pratico da appunto più di 10 anni. Cioè faccio foto, video, immagini solo con dispositivi mobili, quindi con iPhone oppure con tablet. ehm, e questa scultura è stata creata con il software Meshi, che magari voi conoscete, partendo da la foto di un modello che io ho fotografato e ha creato questa versione 3D che poi si può esportare, si può appunto mm, mm, posizionare nel metaverso oppure nella realtà aumentata.
Thank you. I want
Grazie.
to say I understood some of that speaking Spanish, but what I really liked about this piece was that one, I think men masculinity, I mean, I don't know how you identify, but I think there really isn't this outward relationship to exploring themselves through the selfie. So it was really impactful too that you had kind of like this overlay of like a very classical figure of the sculpture, right? Of the idealized masculine body or the body in general, right? Like the standard human is this idea of like this sculptured, like buff, like human, right? And I really like this kind of superimposition of like also like melting, but like you're struggling of like who's going to come forth, right? And it's like this internal struggle
Yes,
of who wants to
esatto.
share, like, it's this person like I want to idealize and represent myself through the selfie in this like way that is expected, right? It's social norms, it's these impositions about what we should look like, how we should share ourselves, but at the same time, it's like this very vulnerable image um, of you just being who you are, right? And I do think that is something that is of a particular time, of a particular place. But yeah, I thought that it was just so playful and whimsical that it's just like you out in a garden. And I think
Yes.
it's kind of this idea. Yeah.
Sì, un giardino, sì. E poi, scusa, c'è un'altra cosa che essendo italiano ed essendo comunque europeo,
Mm,
c'è anche un'idea diciamo, eh, di, vis- di fisicità maschile che riprende dalla tradizione romana, greca, per cui
hmm.
è quel tipo di mascolinità che noi italiani, soprattutto noi italiani, ma in generale noi europei, abbiamo nel nostro DNA, cioè le statue
Yes.
greche, le statue romane sono quel tipo di perfezione fisica, soprattutto maschile, è praticamente parte di noi, cioè
Hmm.
non è soltanto come dire, cioè, idealizzazione di un corpo perfetto, è proprio anche un qualcosa che è parte della nostra storia e comunque non possiamo sfuggire da quel tipo
Mm,
di perfezione fisica che un po' ci perseguita perché la vediamo nelle nostre città, nelle nostre piazze, la vediamo nei
hmm.
musei.
Yes.
Cioè, Roma è un esempio
That's
classico, insomma,
everywhere.
everywhere. Per
Yeah, so
cui,
Nicola was just mentioning how it's kind of like being European, being Italian. There's this kind of like almost in the DNA, right? This expectation of like this Greek, Roman, statuesque body, right? And it's everywhere, right? And I think that's so interesting too, because when we think too about the selfie, it is everywhere. I think it is the medium of the masses. But I think it's so in the day to day that we really forget about it. But I think that's where its power is, right? Because it's so in the day to day that really it is at the same time a very honest and authentic medium, but at the same time it's not. But yeah, thank you, Nicola. That was very nice to hear your
thank you too.
explanation. Yeah.
Thank you too.
All right, so here we have the next one. We have Rudy, another video. And what I thought was interesting too when I saw this one was that this was definitely not an expectation because you see this and you're like, okay, well, where's the body, right? Like, how is this a self-representation? But here it says that it's imagines this as like a recursive machinic act, right? It's like this visual feedback loop. And I think for me, what was really interesting was like this distortion that comes from this constant interaction with technology, right? It's this feedback loop that every time you kind of use it, it changes into something else. Um, so here it says explores the feedback loop between our self-representation and the digital systems that perceive us, right? The image is continuously reauthored, right? And again, so we're not the only ones perceiving. There is a machine perceiving, right? That's perceiving by certain codes, by certain algorithms that were programmed by someone else as well. So it's like what I thought was really confrontational about this piece and the fact that it's called feedback selfie is that if someone saw this, they wouldn't necessarily know that they were looking at a selfie, right? So I think the fact that the artist was really specific and intentional about wanting to name this a selfie, I think allows us to think about how the selfie can be deconstructed in so many different ways. So I'm just going to move a little bit fast here because, again, there's so many things to say about all of these artworks. But in the interest of time, will go through. Oh, did I do this one already? So here we have another artist. So this is an artist from Mexico. This one's called Obsession for You, Obsession with You. And what I thought was interesting too about this piece is that this piece is exploring the body, but from a way about like the corporeal interaction that we have when we're interacting with these AI bots that are like part of social media, right? The way that that feels in the body. You're interacting with this algorithm and you're asking and you're having this conversation. And it's sometimes that thing of like, it sometimes doesn't respond to you in the way that you want, right? And this artist was very intentional about almost like emotionally breaking the machine as well, and how it's collapsing and really thinking about, especially when you're interacting with AI in a way that's not English, you find that it's much easier to break and frustrate, which I think is also very fun because I think it is also very kind of like anti-colonial work, right? And like decentering the West and decentering English and the global North. So it's really about this exploration of like this personalized AI that is supposed to kind of like interact with you in the way that you want it to. It's supposed to like, maybe be fed off of your data or you're training it as you go, but how can you also kind of take this AI and take yourself almost to the brink of breaking down, right? And it's really this more of this emotional reflection of like what happens when you're just constantly like questioning yourself, when you're constantly looking at yourself. Whereas a queer person, you're constantly asked to check yourself, to question yourself, to be present, to not do this or do this. And it kind of leads you to this edge of madness too, I think. And I thought that that was a very interesting way to explore this idea of the self through text, right? Going back to what Garrett was saying about like the way that words and image in AI um, are kind of like differing explorations, because obviously one is image and one is language, but at the same time, it's like you're making images, you're making something visual through the language, right? So it's this act of creation through language that at the same time we, are subject to so many different differences about the meaning of those words, right? So I thought that that was also just like an interesting exploration for this. Oh, this one we looked. So here we're going back to the Hall of Quantum Mirrors, and now we're going into refraction, right? So here it really is about amplifying the fractures, right, that can happen when we look and explore AI. Um, So here we have this artist called Let's Glitch It, called Error's Elegance. And this is identified as a synthetic self-portrait. I mean, when we look at a piece like this, we're like, okay, yes, we see a figure, we see kind of like this reflective surface. It's kind of like this gooey state of being, very transitory. I felt it. And again, this like collapsed embodiment of what a reflection can mean for the body, right? And we have, qualities that are very similar. We see a face, but again, it's like, is this a machine's face? It's still very like humanoid centered. It's still um almost alien-like as well, but it's looking at us, right? It's kind of like has this contestatory, almost defiant stare where it's like you're looking for me and I'm looking back at you, but really, where are we? And like, what is this occupied space? So I think for me, this was kind of like a very interesting representation of like I almost imagine this is kind of what happens when I'm inputting something into the AI, and I'm waiting for it to kind of like come together. I see this kind of like as this primordial goo that is kind of like collapsing, and that it's kind of just like really, bouncing around, but that it starts kind of like condensing. And I almost see this as this type of like maybe like wizard behind the curtain, right? That we have this idea of what it can be and what it can look like, but at the end of the day, we don't really know, right? So here, that's kind of my take and reading on it. Here, obviously, is the artist's explanation. But again, obviously questioning perception, embodiments, right? Talking about the selves flickering. We're gonna go back to refract. Here we have another work, which when I put out this call, this is an artist that we've exhibited before, and I think this is much more of the space that we would have imagined a lot of the artworks to be in, which, as you can see, is still pretty unique in relation to the works we've seen already. But really, it's this explanation of all of the multiple ways that the AI can really play around with who we are. This is a self-portrait of this artist who is from Buenos Aires. And here the artist is really interesting in exploring again like this idea of the twin and the mutation and the refraction that can happen with AI, where you can input your face, your body, and then it'll give you these different versions of yourselves, which you can say, oh, they all look the same, right? But as you start paying more attention, there's these short little variations, right? And I think when I think of the quantum self, I think of all these different versions and all these different entities, people, selves existing in different timelines, right? That are just like us, but there's always something that's really kind of like different and offsetting about who we are. Um, right? When we think about this idea of like the mutation that can happen as well. And something that I thought was very interesting, which I really loved about and is related to kind of this idea of like queer longing for community, was that here they talk about how this image is an act of holding themselves, of giving themselves kind of that emotional and physical support, which I thought was very beautiful to think of, right? It's like when we develop this relationship with AI, in a way, we are searching for this connection and this reflection and this space of being held, and the space of tension too. So I thought that this was like a work that was really good at demonstrating that. So here we have a piece by Edgar Fabian Frias called Crystal Consciousness. And again, just this exploration of this fractal representation of the self, right? We have kind of like this being that has these multiple kind of either reflections. We're not sure if it's them, but if you start looking at the faces, you can see that there is a variation. So we have kind of like, again, this primordial space, these kind of like non-spaces where these selves can exist. And what I really like about this piece is that it does have like this painterly quality to it. I really like that it's almost kind of like in a dreamlike state. I see this piece, and when I thought about it, it was like kind of like that liminal space of thought in between dreams, where you're kind of thinking, what will I be? Who will I be? I think it definitely has an ancestral quality to it of where I see kind of like these lines of light are connecting and drawing parallels to other beings, perhaps, other selves, other entities. So I really thought that this was kind of like one of those, like a somber piece that definitely feels that quality of that dreamlike state. So again, this is by Edgar Fabian Frias. Um, and again, here it's talking about like the parallel versions of the same being, and just the multiplicity of the self, which again, this is something that's reoccurring in so many different spaces of our works. So here we have a piece called The Great Story of Selfies by Elsa Mueller. Um, and this one, I thought was a really interesting piece too, because we are seeing kind of like this space where the artist has so many different photographs, selfies, image of themselves, and it's almost placed again in like this like non-space, which I think really demonstrates like what happens when we have all of these selfies that we take in different contexts, and they're kind of put front and centered in a space that's kind of like a video game, but it's also kind of like an art gallery, but it's also at the same time occupying this space in the metaverse, and it's always like playing with a lot of different reflections. And here they talk about this idea of the video game character creation, and when you're kind of like waiting to pick a character or kind of like finding who you're going to be. So I thought that was it was very interesting that this artist chose to kind of like place these image of themselves and just kind of move within these spheres of knowing, of belonging, and what happens really when you also externalize these photos of who you are, right? They're decontextualized. We can't even see them that clearly, right? They're still kind of like blurred a little bit. It's still like anonymous. And you have these kind of like bodies that are just waiting to take a shape, right? So it's kind of like, again, this self-perception that's happening through the machine, that it's done through the intention of the artist. But at the same time, it's like, you know, we have this face that's looking at this photo of the artist, and we're kind of imagining ourselves in that body, witnessing this selfie, but at the same time, like this machine is just kind of doing what is being told, right? And we have kind of like this ridiculous space of like the laughter and how wild it is for people to just share themselves. Um, so I don't know. I thought this was kind of like a very surreal, kitsch, again, dreamlike space for the selfie to be explored. This definitely threw me when I saw it. I did not expect a work like this to be submitted, but I think it does a very good job and almost just like ridiculing our fascination with our self-expression like through AI and through the selfie, which I think is so important when we talk about the selfie. I think we definitely have to talk about like the embarrassment of existing and of sharing who we are in whatever way we want, even if it's made with like the most authentic explanation. But yeah, I thought this was just like a really playful and kind of funny way to explore this idea of the self. Here we have another one, which I thought definitely leans into the idea of the esoteric side of this exploration. Again, of like the duality between externalizing ourselves and internalizing who we are. Um, this is called lengua ectoplásmica, or transubstantiación glitch. So here it's talking about like this ectoplasmic entity, right? So again, like really going, like taking us into this world of spiritualism, um, and how we have these ideas of dissolving who we are and at the same time almost exercising ourselves. I definitely have had these experiences with the AI where it almost feels like an exorcism, where I'm trying to pull kind of like this entity forth and I'm kind of like struggling to verbalize this, either through words or through visual language. And I thought that this was one of those pieces that again has this painterly quality to it. It definitely very clearly has a person, which we're not sure if it's the artist, or who this physical being is, that at the same time is like almost struggling to release this face or this expression. And I think, again, this reminds me of Nicola's piece in terms of, well, I mean, all of these pieces really, it's like when we input ourselves into the AI and we have this struggle of, okay, like what is going to come forth? Like, is this what I want to share? But at the same time, the AI also has its own interpretation, that we can be comfortable with or not. So it's like this tension, right? I think a lot of these pieces, again, hold space for the tension of what it means for us to even give AI this space, right? Because I think AI is definitely showing itself through our work. So there's this question again of authorship, which I'm sure everyone has different feelings about. But again, like what happens when we're having these explanations and these explorations with AI that are, I mean, are uncomfortable, no? Um, and here I wrote a spectral self-portrait, right? I'm really leaning into kind of that idea of the specter and the ghost almost, or even the soul, right? Of like, does AI have a soul? I mean, who knows, right? It's made of collective consciousness. But I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different repercussions that comes to imbuing something with soul and with an anima, right? So here we're going into the other division, which is transformation, right? So here we're really talking about the idea of transformation through the AI. Here we have a piece by Yi-Chu Lee. Um, and it's thinking and exploring this idea of the dream. So here it says an AI generated digital portrait. Again, then the unstable nature of selfhood. And particularly what drew me to this piece, the first thing that came to mind was Dolly, the cloned sheep. I think it was like the first cloned sheep or something. And the fact that it's kind of like this multiple gazing again of the mirror of what we assume is the mirror. I mean, I interpreted this as a mirror. Again, it could be a portal, but it's like, again, this space of becoming where it's like we have this figure. It's clearly having this moment with like this sheep. And at the same time, like, what does it mean for AI to kind of be in this space of genesis, right? Of cloning these bodies that we either willingly or unwillingly input into the algorithm, right? When we start talking about, these parallels of DNA and science, right? I mean, AI is tech, but I think there's definitely a lot of like science to it and experimentation. So I think for me, what this piece really brought out for me was how does all of this experimentation that we are all doing, right? Because I do think even though we're artists or we might be involved with other disciplines, working with AI, we are experimenting with many different tools that we don't even know the impact that they're going to have, right? So it's almost like this moment of mutual recognition of here really who is the sheep, right? Or who is the subject of experimentation, right? Which I thought, made this a very uncomfortable piece as well. And again, definitely not what I expected, but I thought that it was also interesting to see the representation of an animal, I mean, of a non-human animal in AI, right? I think when we see AI, we're used to seeing bodies and the human. But what happens when we try to represent other animals, right? Other non-human animals through AI? And I thought that, like this was a piece that was powerful in that sense that it's bringing in kind of like this self-recognition of these two animals that are just at the whim of technology at the end of the day, right? So again, a lot of things can be said. Um, but again, how to transmute kind of those explorations. Um, so here we have another one by Elsa Mueller, a video. And what I thought was interesting too was that this one is kind of like a very, gives me the vibe too of stock imagery and kind of like what happens when we have all of these tools that are like make a video talking about this subject, or when we start talking about the AI used in work and in labor, right? We have these digital bodies that are expected to be represented professionally, that are expected to be presented, clean cut, and all these ideas again of like the ideal of what is professional and what should be represented. So I thought that that was very interesting in that sense. I mean, here she's talking about this idea of waiting, right? And how, again, AI is almost waiting for us to interact with it. But at the same time, it creates itself. Um, So I thought that this was very interesting and very uncomfortable because here we have one of the many faces of AI staring back at us, right? And again, who is this face? Where did these eyes come from? Where did these lips come from? Where did this hair, these eyebrows, why does it look like this? Like, who is this person? Does this person exist? Will they exist? So again, it's this idea of almost like we're experimenting and we're making these beings, these entities, and we're giving them form and representation. And we're just kind of like, they're just waiting to be activated, right? So again, it's this idea of power and control that I think we all have to engage with when we're talking about the AI, right? We have this idea, I don't know if it's a false sense idea of power and control, but it definitely makes us really question like what that means, right? To generate these types of beings. So here we have Marie, and Marie is here with us. This is called Ave Maria. And yeah, if you want to share a bit about your work, your process, um, please feel free, Marie. I don't know if you can speak. Hello. Oh, it says she has to go. Oh, we just missed her. Um, Yeah, what I really liked about this piece, it's kind of like, again, brings us into this classical idea of this representation of femininity and womanhood. Here, she specifically talks about the religious iconography of the Ave Maria in prayer. Um, so here, it's this exploration of analog photography input into the AI. And what I really found interesting about this piece is that to someone that, might just see this piece quickly, you could say this is a photograph of someone, right? This doesn't inherently quickly have like an AI generated feel to it, which I think also holds a lot of power, tension, controversy as well, some would say, but almost just kind of like the longing that you have in the eyes. And again, it's like what happens when we have these faces generated through AI? Um, right? That when people, I mean, I think as humans, when we see a face, like we inherently develop these ties of empathy. So what happens when we see this face that almost has kind of like this melancholic, sad look, that could be seen as a photograph, but at the same time has this kind of like uncanny feel to it. And this reminds me to a lot of the previous piece where it almost feels like it's like this waiting, it's like this emotional stare, or some could say it's a blank stare, or it's waiting to be animated. But again, I think the fact that this is a photo and it just still has like a very distinct um, quality to it. Right here we have kind of like another piece that was a close up. And I think for me, what I really appreciated about these works were the texture and the way that it kind of feels painterly, but also photograph. And then you have kind of like these super zoomed in details. And the use of the eye, right? I think when they say the eyes are the window to the soul, I think that's something that in AI is very challenging to represent, but it definitely evokes a presence here, right? And again, it's not staring into the camera as some pieces are, but it's kind of like looking off to the side, is saying like, this is not a piece that's like necessarily reflecting, but it's like looking somewhere else. It's perhaps looking at a different reflection, at a different intention, right? Here we have a piece by Benjamin Armijo. It's called Interfaces of the Self Between Flesh and Algorithm. And I think this is just like a very good example of the way that the AI can really just transform our faces, right? If this artist is kind of like questioning, looking at themselves, right? We have these multiplicities, right? Where we have kind of like this fractured, kind of worried face, and then we have kind of like this more serious um image, and then we have the shadow self here, which I think was the most interesting part of me in this image that really called my attention. Is here we see this kind of like face. It's like maybe has this glow of the blue light of looking at the screen, but we can't tell if they're like looking at the screen or if they're looking at the shadow self that I think also comes up when we take a photo, if we think of like energy work in terms of shadow work, of confronting the pieces of ourselves that are difficult to look at and stare at, which I think is why the selfie makes a lot of people uncomfortable, is that it forces you to engage with kind of like this shadowy figure. So I thought that that was very interesting that the AI chose to reflect this shadow, right? In addition to these other three corporeal selves. Because what does AI understand as a shadow, right? And where does this shadow come from? Is this the being? Or is this maybe someone else that is making themselves present? Or is this the shadow of the AI itself? So I thought that this was an image too that was definitely very unsettling. I think overall AI is very unsettling to me, not necessarily in a negative way. I mean, it could be in a negative way or in a positive way, but I think it's just like, there's like these glimmers, these instances where I think the AI makes themselves very, very present. This is another piece by Edgar Fabian Frias. And this one is called Queer Mycelium Dream. So, what I really liked about this piece was here they talk about symbols of transformation, and this kind of call to mushroom medicine, right? Medicine that a lot of indigenous people and even into the current times, people use to connect with themselves and with nature. And also thinking too about this idea that for a lot of people, AI is becoming kind of like this emotional support, this emotional kind of like vessel for connection. So I think it's really putting into this dichotomy of how does AI represent the natural world, right? Does AI come from nature? I mean, does AI have a body? Is the hardware its body? Is its like physical manifestation coming from nature? I think I always have this questioning and exploration of what happens when literally all of this technology is made of natural materials, right? It's made of natural materials, but at the same time, it's um kind of put through these industrial processes that try to remove it from nature. So if we think of like all of our technology using minerals, these minerals come from land. They're tied to a particular territory. They're tied to a particular geographical space. And what happens when it's kind of like removed from that? So I thought that that was interesting to have this, again, calling in of sorts of nature. That we have, with these types of kind of like natural representations through AI. So here we're in the next section. Next session, it's really talking about kind of like this idea of summoning through the AI, right? So what are the memories or what are the energies that AI holds, right? If we're kind of using AI to scribe and to kind of like go through these different relations and manifestations. Here we have another piece by Garrett Lynch, IRL. This one's called After Michael Mandelberg. And I thought that this was another really interesting exploration in terms of like photography and the idea that we have as the representations of photography being truthful. We have these very like historical looking photographs that to anyone who really wouldn't know that this is I mean, there could be some tells, but I mean, when you just see it, you're like, oh, it's just like one of those old-timey photographs. But I think it's very uncanny in that way. Garrett, do you want to tell us a little bit about this piece?
Yeah, sure. So this piece is, I guess, a fourth work in a series by a number of artists. The original
Mhm.
photographs were taken by, oh, his name has gone out of my head now. He's a very famous American actor, American photographer. Um, Second, let me just look up the name. I'm bad at remembering
I think
names.
here it is. It's it Sherry
Walker Evans.
Levine. Oh, Walker Evans. Oh.
So the original series of photographs are by Walker Evans, and they're of the Depression era, 1930s America, of a family who are struggling to survive in the Midwest. They're farmers, effectively. And Walker Evans went there to document what Depression era America was like. So that's a whole story in itself. However, in the 1970s, there was an artist called Sherry Levine who appropriated the photographs. She took Walker Evans' photographs, photocopied them, and then exhibited the photocopies as her own photographs after Walker Evans. And then in the late 90s or early 2000s, there was Michael Mandelberg, another artist, who appropriated Sherry Levine's photographs, or actual photocopies of Walker Evans' photographs, put them online, made a little website presenting the scanned photocopies, and he presented the work as his own work after Sherry Levine. So what I've done is I've taken that sort of conceptual appropriation play that has occurred across the decades, and I've taken it into the AI age by taking the photographs again, Michael Mandelberg's in this instance, the last ones that were produced, putting them through an AI and creating variants of them. However, what's really important in this is that I haven't just reproduced the images once again. I've actually distributed a script which you can run in Comfy UI, which is an AI generating software, where you can make your own variations of the photograph. So it's effectively an endless number of variations of these Michael Mandelberg appropriated photographs, and everything is provided online. So there's high resolution images of my versions of the photographs. There is the script where you can take and you can appropriate your own, and yeah, so it's a play of appropriation effectively using AI.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this. I think what these pieces what really stood out to me, I mean, just like the labor around just generating the code and all of these things, but it also really made me think about how throughout history there's been documented cases of people kind of like altering history and altering photographs and like editing and Photoshop and all these tools, like the ways that people would kind of
Yeah.
like invent or amass these photographs. And it definitely gave me that quality. And like I said, I think these are very impressive works because you would see this and someone would see them like, oh yeah, that happened. Like, yeah,
Mm.
that existed. And in some way it did. So I think this definitely really leans into the parallel realities aspect, and like the quantum mirror aspect, and intention of this exhibition that all of these are kind of like realities now that have collapsed somewhere. In the future, if someone like finds these photographs and they have absolutely no context about the work, they're like, oh yeah, this was like an old photograph of someone somewhere at some point. And it
Yes.
actually does become that, which I think is like very playful and scary. But I think it's also so interesting to be able to have this. And I really appreciate and love that you have this like open code that people can go in and kind of like intervene and make their own photographs. I think that that's also interesting.
And
Are you able to see when someone goes in and generates their own photographs, are you able to see what they do, or is that kind of just like on their end?
no, no, no. I haven't kept track of that. I want people to be able to generate and use as they want, because when Michael
Oh,
Mandelberg appropriated this, he encouraged people to download high resolution scans, and then they could exhibit the works as their own. So
right.
he himself was kind of prompting to pass these on in yet another iteration. But I
Ooh.
mean, you're right. You're picking up on all the kind of indicators in this. This is about not just taking it into a sort of an AI age, but also taking it into a post-truth age. The
Mm,
photograph you're showing on the screen there, you said about, are these real? People would think they're as real. If you look closely, you'll notice that one of the posters in the background actually has legs.
oh yeah.
So there are subtle little things, but you have to really look. You have to search the image.
Yeah.
You have to study the image. So
Yeah.
it is about playing with that idea of truth and reality and alternative versions of this family.
Mm.
All the faces of the family have been changed as well, very subtly.
Mm. Yeah, no, I love this. I mean, again, so much to say about this work. And I think it's also um Really interesting because when people think of AI, they have this idea of like what AI looks like. And again, I think just even
Mm.
with this exhibition and other exhibitions and this work, it just goes to show that AI can look in so many different ways. Like it is really multifaceted and multiplicitous. And I wanted to categorize this in the idea of remember because I think that the AI is also, again, like going back in the past and like bringing things into the present. And it's like this, and it's playing really with the idea of memory, right?
And archaeology to a certain extent. There's a sort of
Yes,
media archaeology there.
yes, 100%. Yeah, would definitely agree with that. Um, yeah, thank you for sharing. Amazing
No
work.
problem.
So here we have another one. This one I thought was also very unexpectedly when they submitted. It's about noses. This is by James Porritt. And it's a taxonomy of nasal architecture. So I really thought that this was just so unique because it almost seems very niche. But I mean, yeah, like you're focusing on the nose, and the nose is such a very particular sensory input. I was reading somewhere that we really don't know how the nose and smell works. We don't know what that like quality is of how we interpret smell. Like we don't really know what happens when we smell something, like what kind of perceptors in our nose have that and what that triggers in our brain. So I thought that, that was very interesting. That it talks here about this idea of like noses and this idea of like faces betraying themselves, morphologies, and this idea of the taxonomy, which I think really goes back and makes a call to the original purpose of the photograph, which was to classify, obviously with very racist intentions and colonial intentions, but the idea was to like classify, taxonomize, um, represent in a very like truth and scientific way. And, you know, as we have been mentioning before, it's never really been about truth, right? It's always been about composing a particular reality in service of empire or whatever in this case. So I thought that this was very interesting. Olfactory categorizer. We'll go back, right? So I definitely encourage you to go in and read different examples about paranoia noses. So a lot of very kind of like playful ways to talk about it. So here we have one, SR22 by Elise Johnson. Here's like a digital performance, and here it's talking about a performance epic that examines surveillance, autonomy, and digital embodiment as um, it intersects with fractured identity, fractured subjectivity. So I thought that this was also a very whimsical and playful video about just kind of like this being kind of thrown around in this kind of like random world. But again, I think it's just a really good way to represent how when we start talking about cinema or movies or even just like video works that kind of like have either like a narrative or like or non-narrative but still represent like these figures, we're creating these characters and we're creating and giving them bodies and we're making them kind of like interact in these worlds. And again, it's this idea of the act of creation. It's like, what are we creating? What experiences are we creating? What are we kind of forcing these algorithm puppets, you could say, these algorithmic vessels to go through, right? And again, it's like us perceiving this body and this being, and we're like, oh yeah, we're just watching something, but like, is this code feeling like, does this character in this video think they're real? Like, what is their perception of them being in that reality? Um, Again, so many questions that definitely take us into the philosophical space. Thank you for joining us, Nicola. Thank you so much for your explanations. Um, we'll talk
Ciao.
soon. Ciao. Thank you. I feel like I've been speeding through this, but I was very ambitious. with the timing. And again, there's so much, so many things to be said. So I definitely encourage all of you to come back to this exhibition. But here we have Animo by Bodini, who is here with us. So please, if you would talk to us about your work, this was also one that I thought was kind of very fun and interesting. Feel free to share. Oh, I think that they said that they weren't able to speak. Sorry, I think that they said that earlier. I can't remember. Um, oh yeah, he said he was be able to hear but not talk. So this is one that I think representationally was something that people are more familiar with. Like if the average person was taken off the street and they saw this video, they're like, yeah, that's a face. That's like a human. That's like a body. That's this, right? Obviously, it's kind of played around and distorted and flattened to a sense. But what I really thought was interesting about this piece was that it's kind of this figure and these eyes that are like looking at you, but at the same time are very suspiciously like looking around, waiting for something to happen. I think that there's something that occurs when we have the face kind of flattened or messed around, played with in the way that Animal and the way that this piece does. And I think that, again, we immediately, when I specifically was looking at these pieces, I thought a lot too about the mask. I think this piece has a mask-like quality to it, which I think obviously adds a lot of layers to what we have when we talk about self-representation, right? How it's like morphing into different expressions, into different faces, and definitely a very sculptural element to it as well. What I really appreciated about this piece was that it seems kind of, when you look at it, it seems like very upfront, and it seems like it's kind of laying everything out on the table. But the more that you sit with it, the more that you're kind of questioning of, you know, is this a flattened face? Is this like three faces coming together? Is this kind of like this mutant? Really what happens when AI is played around. And then you question like, what was AI's role in this? Is this the actual face of the artist? Is this just a type of kind of algorithm that is able to have like very kind of like actual representations of the face? So I think that there's definitely like a lot of very interesting questions too. But I think the representation of the emotions and the eyes and the smile and this idea of kind of like looking around, it definitely reminds me of the other pieces where you have kind of like these avatars waiting around to kind of like be called on. So I thought that that was a kind of um, very interesting idea too, especially for the artist talking about this idea of like inherited moods, and how the AI too is representing these ideas or these emotions that itself has never felt. Maybe it knows how to describe, but what does that mean? And again, is description all we can give about a mood? Or does it have to have like this embodied emotional aspect to it, right? Here we have Always So Artificial by FZ Zook, which when I saw this, I immediately was like, I don't think this fits at all into this open call, honestly. And then I started sitting with it, and then I started reading the explanation, and then I was confronted with my own prejudices and normative expectations about what embodiment is through AI. But something what I really thought was interesting is that, for some context, it says that this began as a close-up of an electrical pole outside of the artist's childhood bedroom on Christmas Eve. It's using AI to imagine what might be beyond the frame. The photograph contains several tiles generated around the subject with the prompt, "There's nothing else out there." So what I really thought was interesting about this piece is that we don't technically see a body here, but it made me feel like I almost imagine as if myself was standing like looking out and almost at like this twilight dusk expanse. And this idea of memory, right? What happens when we think about a memory or when we're remembering something, right? They say that the body doesn't know how to distinguish between a memory or like a thought and like something actually happening. So that really made me get into the more like philosophical questions of embodiment in relation to memory, right? How is memory represented through the AI or through these technologies, right? And how is memory a related part of embodiment, right? Do we need to have a body to remember? How does it feel when we think about a memory? So I think for me, when I saw this work, I was just very challenged visually and conceptually about embodiment AI and AI. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to include this piece was because I did want to challenge and just show the different ways that we can philosophically and conceptually engage with the idea of embodiment and memory and AI, and expanding, right? It says here that it expanded this like photograph of this space that I think the artist felt tied to, um, right? And this idea of the visual expanse. This one is just one of those pieces that were very unexpected. So here we come to the last section. I think we're right on time. Um, Here, it's really about prophesizing what could come forth, right? And thinking really about AI as a looking glass to what we can expect. Here we have this piece called Garden of Alden by two artists, Claudia Sobre and Next Trampus. I hope I am not butchering that name. And these are two artists that work as a duo. And here they worked with collage, they worked with AI, but I thought that this piece was just so visually complex. And there's so many ways to sit with this piece. But what I really thought about this, about including this piece was just again the way that we have this representation of these two beings, right? Where you're like, okay, yes, I recognize the figure, right? It's very kind of a little bit more figurative, but they're thrust in kind of like this space of conflict and a very like visual and dense saturation. And when I thought of this, it's called Garden of Aden, really talking about AI. And I think it's really visually throwing us into all of this conflict that happens around AI, all of these challenges, all of these different entities and factors, and really a lot of the darker side of AI, right? I think for me, when I saw like these bombs and like these drones and like these eyes, really about like how AI is a surveillance technology to some extent, and how AI, at the end of the day, we're making it for art and we can be using it for so many amazing creation and bountiful and beautiful things. But at the end of the day, there's also a very dark side to AI. There's the side that's tied to defense, and war and observation and all of these other things. So I thought that this piece was very good at kind of like bringing in those challenges, right? So they have a very rich and thorough explanation here, which I definitely encourage you to read. But it's playing on this idea of like the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And what happens really when we have this temptation of AI? There's still a lot of discussion of like, oh, should we use AI? Should we not? Who's ostracized for using AI? Who isn't? Who is allowed to use AI? In what context should we? And in what instances we shouldn't? So there's this idea of like good and evil when it comes to AI. And I thought that that was so interesting to bring up, because some people are positioning this as a moral choice, right? Like, oh, I'm not using AI for these moral reasons. But again, when we talk about technology and being online and being um, in use of all of these different technologies, even not just AI, but like, social media, different phones. It's like there's this idea of morality and that there is a moral choice. But I think that the more we start incorporating and exploring it, we realize that there sometimes really isn't a choice, and that a lot of these times, these technologies are kind of forced upon us in different ways, whether it's because they're there and we're like, oh, we might as well use them, or because we're deliberately made to use these technologies. I think a lot about social media. I think too a lot about how we're expected to use social media to connect, because if not, how are we going to connect with others? And they're kind of like forced us into this false choice sometimes. So I don't know. I think that there's a lot of interesting things that could be said about that, which, we are not going to get into because there's so many different conversations to be had around the good and evil of AI, right? Which I think at the end of the day, when we start talking about morality and ethics, I think we can get very complicated. But now here we're going into another piece that I thought was a very interesting take on this open call by Madame Emoticon. It's called She Has Balls number two. And something that I just want to say a little bit before Madame shares about this piece is that when I saw this piece, first of all, I love the color. I really, really always appreciate just like the glossiness and just like the rich color that Madame uses in her pieces. And I also really thought about this too, thinking about the name even before I saw the explanation. Like, really, again, thinking about how we conceive of the body and how we have these normative expectations as to what AI should interpret as a body. I really thought about, if we input certain ideals about the body into AI and AI gives us this, like, who are we to say that this is not a body to AI, right? So that's just kind of like my own personal reading. So, Madam, please share with us, tell us more about this piece. And yeah, kind of like your intention behind this.
Thank you very much, darling. So, I'm a conceptual artist exploring feminist aesthetics and metaphysics. And the displayed piece belongs to my series She Has Balls. Some parts of the series are more straightforward, some are more ambiguous. And the work that I submitted to the Holographic Selves Pavilion falls under the second category. It is more open to interpretation intentionally, so I thought that it would fit the theme of the exhibition. I am interested in the philosophical questions concerning vagueness, and in that literature, the term precisifying comes up often. What I mean is that if we precisify a vague term, then the vagueness or indeterminacy perceived in the word disappears and becomes a mere linguistic phenomenon. So it can be explained away. And now, if there is no vagueness in the word, then I think that would be devastating to art. So I wanted to resist that idea and claim that meaning and the work itself here is vague or indeterminate and cannot be precisified. And I wanted to also tie it to the domain of quantum mechanics and quantum physics. So this is how I put it into words. The artwork exemplifies how norms surrounding sex can be playfully questioned with the help of AI. The pieces being in superposition, refusing to become collapsed into a precisified object based on the viewer's interpretation. So that's it. And I also like how you summarized it or introduced it, because I think that it also adds another layer or another potential interpretation to the piece. Thank you
Thank you,
very much.
Adam. Yeah, no, I really love that
Thank
because
you,
again,
darling.
yeah, I think it's one of those pieces that again, it's like when we talk about the body and embodiment through AI, we're expecting to see something that we're used to, right? We're expecting to see a normative body that looks a certain way, that has certain limbs, has certain expressions. But again, AI can be so many different things. And I think that this was also just so playful. I mean, tying this exploration to about sex, we start talking about anatomy, and then we start talking about the role that the sphere has had in art. And I think when I see this, I think of just again, like kind of this space that AI has where it's literally waiting to become anything it wants to be. Sometimes it's forced to be by certain words, but I really like this idea of vagueness. And vagueness, but also tied to liminality, right? And the possibility of being and becoming, which holds that power, right? And again, there's that tension of like, oh, is this going to become something? Is it not? But I really appreciated that you included this type of almost repetitive um spherical explorations that also gives me this idea of the archive. I feel like these lights up here almost make me feel like I'm walking into this archive or this library or this space that AI has. And it has like all of these different spheres, that could be display cases, could be archive boxes. We don't really know what they are, but it seems that AI does. And I almost like see this as that tension and that waiting period where I almost see this being as like a still frame of a video where we don't know where this is going to go. It also has like a very Stanley Kubrick vibe to it, almost even horror-ish too, which I think that embodiment is very messy. It is very grotesque at times. And I think that that's something that I do get a lot of your vibe, a vibe that I get from your work, grotesque, but not in like a negative sense, but just like grotesque in that like icky, ooey way of like, what is this going to be, right? That space of like metamorphosis of discomfort that happens when you really don't know what's coming, but it's going to happen. So I think this was another one of those pieces that I was really excited to include because I definitely think it expands on so many ways about what embodiment can look like, Then you can start getting into spaces of, um, in the section of prophesizing is what happens, for example, when we start talking about self-representation or faces where we start seeing faces becoming standardized, right? What happens when we start seeing this Instagram face or this selfie face becoming so prevalent in celebrities, right? And that trickles down to the public. So I think it's almost like in this like future too, where we've become so almost homogeneous as well, right? I think this is speaking to a very dystopian future where it's like we've all become very homogenized too. And is it a question of choice? Is it a question of imposition? So I really imagine like AI almost like, move going thousands of years into the future and showing us this image of like this is a future that's coming and we don't really know what's behind this like and I think that's one of the powerful things about this image is that it can be so many things. Um, and at the same time, it can be just balls. It's just like green balls.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
yeah, yeah, I just wanted to add that those questions of standardization, homogenization, um, have been questions that I have been fascinated by lately,
Mm.
explicitly. So yes, I agree with you. Definitely. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. So we're almost coming to an end. We have just a couple. So here we have Connected Yet Alone by Kalenia D. And here's talking about this desire of connection, right? And I think it's so interesting that we have some pieces that are kind of this entity or this body in a very kind of like um pensive pose. Again, this is not a figure that's looking into the camera. This is a figure that's also like connecting. So I do imagine this is another room of AI, right? And I think it was also interesting, like this drawing of the sphere, right? Of this kind of circle. And this drawing of like these lines, almost these veins, this source, right? And like we have like these hands, kind of like these fingers melting together. And it looks like the body is proportionate and it's normative, but at the same time, it's kind of melting into it in itself. It almost gives again like this womb-like quality, the liminality. Um, and it also reminds me too of like this interconnectedness that we assume that we have, where we have all of these different nodes that we're connected to. But what does that really mean? How are these um contributions working, one way or the other. So I thought that this was just like a very kind of like beautiful and delicate image. Also very like story-like, very fairy-like. Um, and here it's talking about this loneliness, right? And I think that's something that I also think too a lot about AI. It's like AI is everywhere, but you know, how can it interpret like these types of feelings and emotions, right? Because we see the figure in the face, and it does definitely evoke the sense of like, loneliness, being inside, going inward. So it's just so interesting when AI generates these types of images. And again, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, it's just like visually generating this, but would this provoke eventually down the line some sort of sentience in terms of AI. I don't know. I think about that a lot too, even just with all of these images that we're generating. When we're talking about embodiment and we ask AI about embodiment, how is it understanding it, right? We always see as our conversations being one-sided, but is some server somewhere gaining consciousness? And like, what does that mean? I don't know. I think it's troubling and very specific to. So here we have another video, Holographic Body by Lua Liska. And again, here what we're talking about, the body is dispersed across data, interfaces, and code. So there's a little bit of us in AI, in many different types of AI, in many different servers, and many different spaces. And what I thought about this one was so interesting that we have kind of like these landscapes of the body that are superimposed with like these aspects of technology. And it almost gives me kind of this idea of like a video essay or like an abstract um, layering of text. And references to how the body has been categorized and the systems that have been represented, and like again, like this playful engaging of the selfie. So it really was kind of one of those videos that seems so layered with so many different aspects of what the body and data, and almost has kind of like this stock image quality to it. The has so many different elements that we have kind of seen around, and that at the same time you know, are collaged and composited into one video that's like trying to communicate something to us. But again, it's like reminds me to a lot of like
¿Cómo?
Nico, it's like this
Señor, eu acredito que se
self-representation.
pode passar de...
Hello?
Ah, isso. Não tua catena.
Who's
Tá
talking?
bom, então chega a morrer.
I hear someone talking.
Não, Alfonso. Não,
Oh, I think Boldini accidentally unmuted him. Um, yeah, so this is just one of those videos too that I'm like, wow, there's a lot going on here, right? And it's one of those pieces that has so many layers. And again, the layers here as the artist goes through them. Um, and they're dealing a lot with this idea of like post-humanity, right? And what happens to when AI is formulating these different ideas and these different fields. So here it says, selfie and my body are the starting point and the endpoint reflection. The path between them seems opaque, eerie, and uneven, right? Just an abundance of potential realization. So again, it's this artist that's exploring and representing themselves in so many different ways. And what happens when the body, this carnal aspect of the body is just transposed to more of this digital interface, and how they can kind of like blend the lines, because at the end of the day it just becomes an image, right? So how does like this carnality that we assume through a photograph and through a body, as it's kind of like melted through this AI, just become differently defined, right? um and here we come to the last one. So this is Cyborg Couture Collection. So this one is by me, Linea de Luz. This is my artist name. And something that I just really wanted to explore with this piece was just fashion, right? And how technology and the selfie and these screens are really impacting the way that we share ourselves. And I think as artists, we're always kind of like the ones that are the early kind of trendsetters when it comes to a lot of these things that we later see in fashion. So I really thought in the future, I'm like, I can totally see a fashion house start incorporating screens into, their wearables, start, really emphasizing the phones, start, making the phone and self-representation like high luxury. So that's just kind of like one of those playful ways to really explore how the body can represent itself. So here I'm talking really about, fashion is not just an ornament, but it's also infrastructure, right? If we really start thinking about the parallels and the metaphor of the body and the self as infrastructure, what happens when that is commodified and is just made for consumption, right? So with that, we are continuing to the other side. So it says you've made it through the hologram, and this is just another kind of like little closing context about how what I really wanted this exhibition to be a field of speculation, a field that is confronting us with all of the different ways of embodiment. I really wanted this exhibition to be an open-ended question. And again, I just really want to thank all of the artists for sending their works and feeling called to share their works within the context of this exhibition, right? I think it is a very performative exercise as well to gather these as social documents, beyond just the aesthetics and the artworks. I do think that they are all individually social documents of their time, that do a really interesting job at concretizing how we can think of AI and how we can use AI to explore the body. And as you saw, there are so many different ways to represent the body, from the very figurative to the very conceptual, philosophical, almost spiritual realm of it. And I think it's a spectrum, it's a nonlinear spectrum. It is multiplicitous. It exists in so many different ways, in so many different dimensions. So I really wanted to kind of leave the viewer with this idea of like, what did you learn? What questions came up? How has this also impacted your perception of the self and your perception of AI and identity? I think that even just speaking about the Wrong Biennale, when we talk about AI and even just digital art too, we have to all do the labor of sharing our work, building the verbiage, building the concepts, talking about our work, because we really have to socialize and educate and build a literacy around what AI can look like, all of the different ways that it takes. Like, we really want to make sure that we are also taking ownership of the narratives around our practices. And I think as artists that are experimenting with I really want to commend everyone for being so brave and being vulnerable to engage with a tool that we don't even really know how it works. We don't know the impacts that it's going to have conceptually. It is a very contestatory space. It is a very controversial space for a lot of very important and real reasons. But beyond that, I think it's always the job, and also the responsibility and the blessings of the artist to be able to have that calling to want to be able to explore any new technologies that come forth, right? If we think of, even all the different mediums that over the years made themselves into different art practices, right? I mean, when we talk about photography, when we're talking about just the computer, when we're talking about the digital, right? These are fields that are just forming. AI has been around for a while, but I think socially and publicly, maybe 5 years now, if if that much. So I definitely want to commend all of us for working and experimenting with these. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. To those of you that are listening in the future, that are watching this video, hopefully that this has left you with a lot of different questions. Discomfort is okay, um, but also regeneration with excitement, with doubt, um, yeah, with interest and intrigue, which I think is the most that we can always ask for as artists, is to generate some intrigue and some ideas around all of these different topics. So we're right on time. I want to invite any of the artists that are here, if they want to speak, if they want to share, give any closing thoughts, ideas. I will be posting this to YouTube so you can have this for your records. Again, thank you so much for being here, for spending your time, for your generosity and sharing and speaking about your work. So please, who else, if anyone else would like to have the floor, please be my guest. Going once, going twice. I see some comments. Thank you, Garrett. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, madam. To everyone else that tuned in, thank you so much. Again, we are the Selfie Institute for Selfie Studies. Please stay tuned to more exhibitions, open calls to more research. Again, if you're interested in any form of self-representation online, please check our work out. Send us work. We would definitely love to publish. We would love to share, and we will definitely continue generating more dialogue, not only around this work, this pieces, this exhibition, but just around digital self-representation online. So thank you so much. This has been Holographic Selves for the Wrong Biennale, and we will continue to see all of you in the future and in all of the different dimensions that you are tuning in from. Bye, everyone. Take care. Thank you so much. Goodbye. And I'll let you know when the recording is up.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
You too.